Hello, I'm Professor Krantz, Director of the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, and we are starting something new this week. It's called ISRALERT. It will be a weekly feature on our website, a video dealing with a key Israel-related current issue. This week we're going to look at the role of foreign policy in the upcoming American presidential campaign, which is now a bit less than a month away from when this is being recorded. Until recently, the major media commonplace has been that the key issue in the campaign is domestic. That people are not concerned with foreign policy issues, they are concerned with the economy, rising debt, the high unemployment rate, the collapse of the housing market, and so on. Foreign policy has largely been ignored, and when it wasn't ignored, the media, the major media, generally praised President Obama for his supposed achievements. But as we speak, foreign policy issues have in fact returned to the campaign and to the key position which they usually deserve. And increasingly, President Obama's record in foreign policy, above all in the Middle East, is receiving negative attention. Why is this? Syria and Turkey have been trading artillery barrages for the last week in what may well develop into a serious escalation of the regional tension, the civil war in Syria, which has been going on now for 18 months. In Washington, there are a series of politically charged investigations into the murder of the American ambassador in Benghazi, Libya, and into the role of administrative mishandling of the affair, from lack of security to covering up what in fact happened. In Iran, there have emerged massive anti-Ahmadinejad demonstrations by people who are being negatively affected by the collapse of the rial, of the Iranian currency, under the pressure of the tightening sanctions regime, which is being applied to Iran's nuclear drive, an attempt to prevent their achieving a nuclear weapon. In the midst of all of these elements, these developments, and reflecting his crushing defeat in the debate last week between Romney and himself and Obama, Romney's poll figures have begun to rise, both generally and in the key electoral swing states, which will decide the election. So with the election a few short weeks away now, foreign policy issues have once more come to the fore and thrown what is at stake in this election into very high relief. Let's continue to look at some factors. The tensions between Turkey, which is a NATO member after all, and the Assad regime. This now, it looks like, could turn into war, possibly one involving Syria's backers, Russia and Shiite Iran. The rebels in Syria have been supported by the U.S. and above all by Sunni Saudi Arabia and Dubai, but indirectly France and Britain and even Canada have been supporting the insurgents. So if this continues and worsens into a Syrian-Turkish war, one involving, this would immediately involve other powers. Syria supports the Hezbollah, Shiite terrorists in Lebanon. It could lead to a kind of Gaddafi intervention on the part of the West, a direct military intervention to prevent the spreading of the war, which has been avoided until now, which the West has said they don't want direct military intervention. This downward spiral could also affect Israel, which is on one of the borders with Syria. After all, Syria has a very large chemical weapon industrial complex, which the Israelis are concerned about. So if that were to happen, if the Israelis were to enter into this situation, or be forced to enter before November 6th, that would have not only serious regional and even global implications, but clearly it would have an impact on the election itself. So what we're looking at here is a potentially worsening situation, which would be reflected in the electoral campaign. We could factor into this many other elements, but just a few would come into play here. The deepening problem for Obama of the investigation into the Benghazi murders, congressional investigations, and the mass protests which have broke out in Iran, which could perhaps lead to a revival of the 2009 popular movement against Ahmadinejad. You may remember that Obama refused to intervene in 2009 and never forthrightly denounced the regime for its crushing of the popular movement. We could factor in also, to conclude here, the seeming unraveling of both Iraq and Afghanistan, which is going on at the moment, or in Egypt facing deepening economic crisis at the hands of the new leadership, the Muslim Brotherhood, ideological Islamist leadership, and more broadly even the collapse of the Arab Spring, the failure of the promise of democratic change which that spring seemed a year ago to usher in. I haven't said a word here about the possibility of an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear installations, which is still a possibility before the election, and which would, if that occurs, would radicalize the entire region and the political dynamics that I'm talking about. So it's foreign policy which has come to the fore and is now reinforcing Romney, who was leading in the polls after his excellent debate performance on domestic issues. And you know that this will continue. There are only a few weeks left in the campaign, and Romney is beginning to poll ahead of Obama. And now we look at the upcoming debate, the final and third debate, which will be on October 22nd, and which will be focused on foreign policy. So the foreign policy dimension of the election becomes fundamental and potentially even decisive. The mainline media commentators told us until recently that foreign policy was irrelevant, which shows us the necessity to understand the dynamics that go on, to look objectively, to be analytic, and to have a longer-term vision than yesterday's polling results. We tried to do that at Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, so I invite you to stay tuned here to the ISRALERT, which will be a feature of each week's website activity, and also to check out our daily briefing and our True North blog to keep up to date on the election, and of course generally on Israel and Middle East issues. So thank you very much, shalom, and look forward to seeing you again next week.